Good morning. My name is Oluremi Akin-Olugbade, and I will be presenting a research paper I wrote together with my professor, Dr. Holler, studying. It's called Within Africa, Nigeria and the DRC. So basically, it's going to be looking at factors that influence poverty in these two nations and how these factors affect their economic development. So first of all, we have to understand what economic growth is. So economic growth is an increase in the real gross domestic product per capita. So simply, it's the increase in the standard of living of the average citizen in a country. Why have I chosen to study Nigeria and the DRC? Most African countries, just like Nigeria and the DRC, have started out with similar origins, histories, institutions, government systems, but somewhere along the line, some countries are growing economically, experiencing phenomenal economic growth, while others still lag behind. So the question is, why do gaps like this exist between countries like Nigeria and the DRC? So first of all, we'd have to look at what economic growth looks like in Africa, in Nigeria, and the DRC. Because relative to the rest of the world, these countries experience economic growth rather differently from everybody else. So first, we'll look at the value of the natural resources. What value is given to the natural resources? How much profit and revenue do these resources that they have bring back to these countries? Standard of living, what does the average citizen live on? What does the average citizen need to live every day in these societies? Infrastructure, what schools, transportation, electricity, water supply, are these things evident in these societies? Industrial activity, how involved are they in creation, innovation that's going on in the world today in their societies, and their global engagements in and out of Africa? What kind of relationships do they have with their neighbors and with the Western world at large? So this is just a brief history of both countries with great influence on the factors that do influence poverty. Now, these factors are also called poverty traps by Oxford professor Paul Collier, who thinks that a lot of African countries do experience these factors and hence they do influence their economic development. Natural resources. So Nigeria is thus natural resources such as crude oil, natural gas, minerals, tin, limestone, and the DRC has a really large mineral reservoir of cobalt, copper, diamonds, gold, and other things. Nigeria has experienced one major conflict in its history, which is the Nigerian Civil War from 1967 to 1970. The DRC has experienced two major civil wars, the first Congo War from 1996 and 1997, and the second Congo War from 1998 to 2003. Government systems. Nigeria has experienced both a democratic and military system of government over its history since its independence in 1960, and the DRC has experienced three governments, an authoritative interim and at present a democratic government. Geographical location. Where are these countries located? Nigeria is a coastal region in West Africa, while the DRC is a landlocked region in the southern western part of Africa. So the first factor we'll be looking at is natural resources. Now, natural resources, as we know them, is supposed to be some sort of blessing to nations. They're supposed to create revenue and profit and help improve the standard of living. But over time, we've seen that natural resources have come out as sort of a curse to African countries, and we'll see how. But first, we'll have to look at how internally in these countries, these resources have been converted to wealth. How have they been efficiently transformed from natural resources to wealth for the people in these countries? And Nigeria is the highest oil producing country in Africa with 170 million people, and 70% of its revenue is generated from oil production. The remaining 30% comes from agriculture, services, and so on. The DRC, on the other end, is heavy in mining and agriculture. Unfortunately, the DRC, due to its lack of infrastructure and facilities, has been unable to convert its vast mineral resources into wealth for its nations, with the average citizen in DRC living on $282 a day. Property rights. Now, how do property rights play a part in the domestic interaction with these resources? Now, for those people that can't afford to engage in the economy, because the property rights in these regions aren't strong enough, people aren't willing to invest back in their own, the citizens aren't willing to invest back in their societies, and as a result, their resources just remain dormant and don't bring any wealth to them. Now, Nigeria has, according to the Index of Economic Freedom, Nigeria has a 30-point average when it comes to property rights, meaning there's a body in charge for property rights, but it's heavily influenced by bureaucratic systems, red tape, and a lot of corruption, which makes it difficult for people to want to engage in their society. In the DRC, most property belongs to the state. So people have no ownership over anything, and it's a lot more unsure than in other regions for them to engage in industrial activities. International interaction with resources. Well, and I think this just leads back to the issue of property rights. As a result of constant instability and not an insecure system, foreign investors are not as willing to invest in societies like this where things are not stable and they're unsure they will get returns on their investments. Boundary disputes. The GRC over time we've seen has been engaging in lots of conflict. As I'm not sure if everybody knows, but it's been engaged in lots of conflict, and it's been conflict with its neighbors such as Rwanda, Uganda, Zambia, and it's as a result of issues over who owns what land. Do I own this? Who owns this? And because there's so much claim to the land, there's constant disputes and lots of people die. Nigeria and Cameroon, on the other hand, have from 2007 to 2009 had argued over land in the Bakassi land, which it was able to resolve amicably without any wars, and which is also is a sign of growth in these societies as relative to the DRC. So conflict is another factor. Now, how does conflict play a part in poor economic development? Conflict just doesn't arise out of the blue. There are signs and symptoms that show that conflict might arise in a certain region, and these signs include dropped levels of income, as was the case in the DRC, where during its authoritative rule, income started to drop relatively low, and this led to rebel movements in the DRC. Political instability, same case in Nigeria, also the constant change from military government to democratic government back and forth was a sign of conflicts to come. Causes of conflict are relatively similar to the signs of conflict, as the only addition is the natural resources, which should be a blessing, but sometimes due to the dispute over who owns these natural resources and who should have control over them, eventually leads to conflict between between smaller communities and the government, or between communities themselves. Effects of conflict: a fall in human capital. People die. People aren't willing to go outside and engage in productive activities because there isn't enough safety, or there's just no education to educate people on how to convert their resources to wealth. Inactivity of the state leads to a fall in GDP. So as a result of no production going on, GDP begins to drop tremendously, as was the case in the DRC during the Congo Wars, and economic stagnation. So either the economy doesn't improve or it just falls outright to the ground. Government systems. Nigeria has experienced two forms of government: a military rule and democratic rule. The military rule in Nigeria was greatly characterized by violence, force, and embezzlement, and the democratic government in the past and still recently is being seen as corrupt and not straightforward. But recently, with recent elections, Nigeria has had its first free and fair elections that's being recognized by the world, which is the signs of growth coming to the country. The Democratic Republic of Congo has experienced a dictatorship government, an interim government, and a democratic government. The dictatorship government then there was under Joseph Mobutu, who led the country for 32 years, and during his period, there was a great deterioration in the infrastructure in the country, and GDP per capita tremendously dropped, leaving a lot of people in poverty. And as a result, this led to rebel movements by leaders such as Joseph Kabila, who was the interim leader after Joseph Mobutu was taken out of power. However, this period of interim government, because there isn't a solid role or solid leader that everybody recognizes, there was a lot of war during this period, which was where the first Congo War and the second Congo War, which is largely referred to as Africa's World War, occurred during this interim government. The democratic government is relatively new in the DRC, and it's still characterized as largely corrupt, but for a starting nation in Africa, this is almost a common trend in starting democratic governments in Africa. Geographical locations. So geographical locations. How is the geographical location of a country, how does it influence its ability to make profit? Now, Nigeria, as we see it down there, is a coastal region, simply meaning it has access to the waters. So its vast access to the waters encourages trade with other countries because the ships can move in and out, they can transfer goods and services back and forth. However, with the DRC here, the DRC is a landlocked region, and because it has that little port over there, the transportation of resources is very difficult for the country at large, which has a lot of resources that could greatly help everyone, greatly help the international society. Now, generally, the effects of these factors, these poverty traps on the society. Now, the Human Development Index is an index that's calculated by the United Nations. Basically, it studies the life expectancy of a country, the level of literacy, and the standard of living. Nigeria averages at 0.504, which is a relatively low index, but it shows that there is some sort of growth going on where it's not Nigeria isn't experiencing the same backward economic growth as it was in the past. However, the GRC is at the very bottom of the index with 0.338, which shows that there's still a very low level of education, um, still very low standard of living and life expectancy. Capital with things like conflict going on, a lot of people die, which affects the human capital. When there's conflict, people don't want to come out and engage in society. There aren't enough education facilities to educate children, women, and men in the society, and as a result, the resources they have just remain stagnant, and the capital isn't being used to create wealth in any way. Growth, and as a result of the capital not being harnessed properly and used effectively, there's barely any growth going on in these societies, and these societies remain relatively poor. So, in conclusion, Nigeria and the Democratic Republic of Congo are both countries. They still are the poorest countries in Africa, but with the increase we see in Nigeria's growth so far, it is evident that there is some growth going on in Africa. It might not be to the standard of the rest of the world, but there is growth going on. And the reason why I've looked at both countries relative to each other is because it is a more realistic basis to look at these countries that are similar to each other than looking at, let's say, Nigeria and China, countries that just don't have relatively similar backgrounds and histories. And it's a lot more realistic to look at these countries with a lot of history and institutions in common. Thank you. Hi. Yeah. I think the reason why was because I'm of the opinion that GDP per capita, takes in every situation in some sense. You know how the average person lives, and if it is relatively low, you know that it connects back to all these other factors. You know, there's a possibility that okay, the employment rates are really low, or maybe people aren't educated enough to engage in society. So I just was of the opinion that they all come back in some way to live to each other. And yeah, sure. Yeah. Yeah, definitely. That is true. That is true, but I don't think they have that much of an influence in it because Africa is a country with a really high population of poor people in it. I mean, yes, it would have an effect on it, but I think the effect of the greater population of poor people is relatively significant in that GDP. But I totally understand what you're saying. I'm looking for it. Thank you. Wherever. Sure.
I was just going to ask you if you could summarize what is the main factor behind Nigeria's phenomenal growth over recent years. Is it industrial growth? Is it the expansion of the oil economy? What is it that leads to this? And I think that you have that graph
Yeah.
that shows the average GDP raises phenomenally over what, a 10-year period. What's exactly behind that?
I'm of the opinion that it's a lot of new industries being created in this society with technology. There's been a great investment in technology in Nigeria. There are a lot of small franchises from the US, such as Cold Stone, KFC, investing in these societies where they were not willing to come in before. So I think it's a lot of foreign investment and people's willingness to come into this society, such as the oil companies, tech companies. So it's greatly influenced Nigeria's GDP. Yes, I've heard about it. I don't remember off the top of my head, but I have heard about it. Yeah. Yeah. Uh, yeah, sure. Recently, the GRC has had China as a large investor in its activities, and what it does is it's a I don't really, I'm not pronouncing this right, but it's an agreement where they have the China provides investment loans, development investment loans to the GRC in return for their mineral resources. Now, it might not. I'm of the opinion that if there's a give and take going on between these countries, foreign countries and these less developed countries, it will kind of it might hold them a lot more accountable to improving their societies. And so if the US wants to take maybe the same route, it could work because there has been relatively a little bit of growth in the GRC. I mean, it's not as bad as it was before, but a lot of people have said with China's involvement there, it is a bit scary, yes, but it's made their economy a lot better than it was 10 years ago. So you have to take the same route.
We have time for one more question.
Okay. Yes. Yeah. In the past, it hasn't been a priority at all. I mean, public schools have been relatively very bad in Nigeria over time. I didn't go to public school, and I know why I didn't go to public school. They were really bad. But over time, they become a lot better than they were. Now with the Chibok girls, with things like the Chibok girls, it still shows that there's still inefficiencies in Nigeria's education system for things like that to go on in that kind of region. But there is hope, I hope. Yeah. Thank you. Oh, okay. All right. Thank you.